it's Mandy. Been a while, but I am back. As I'm not sure if that's very exciting news, but anyway, today I'm going to be recommending the best of Milligan and McCarthy. So that's Pete Milligan and Brendan McCarthy. Pete Milligan, you'll know from quite a lot of stuff. He's the writer of things like Shade the Changing Man, Hellblazer. Um, Recently, he's doing an Aftershock series, which is, bear with me, get my stack of recently purchased comics, and it is Dogs of London, which is like a really cool London gangster series, but with supernatural undercurrents in it. And then you have Brendan McCarthy, this chap here who's done all this artwork here. He's known the most for recently for doing the storyboards and the designs for the last Mad Max film. If you can get the art book of that, guess it. I want to guess it, but I'm not being able to guess it yet, and it looks so good. But yeah, and he designed things like the cartoon reboot. He's the ideas guy behind that. Back in the 90s and 80s, he did the covers for Shade the Changing Man, did a few stories in that. He's predominantly known for doing more stuff for 2000 AD. Recent thing he did was a Chopper story, the surfer from the Judge Dredd universe. He did a Chopper story, which was released recently in trade paperback, which you can get from Rebellion. Well worth getting out because it's beautiful artwork, good story. And he also has done another series called The Sorcerer of Zilk, which is very, very psychedelic, which is like his jam. But this book collects a lot of stuff what wasn't collected previously. It's just stuff from the early 80s all the way through to, I think, the 90s. Yeah, I think just up to the 90s with this. But it's stuff that's never been collected before. Or if it was, it's just like in small prestige files. But this is like a really hefty bad boy of a book. Now, I got this from eBay. Now, normally, I've been looking on eBay and other places, and it can be pricey. Some people have been selling it for about 40 quid, 50 quid, but somehow I managed to find it for £12. So I was pleased about that. So yeah, so it's got about 280 pages, something like that. But it's a generous sized book. It's a bit like Dark Horse do these really nice like library editions where they're an oversized book, about the size. They're bigger than an omnibus, they're taller than an omnibus, so they're a nice size. And for his artwork, it's so worth it. Now, this book, collects some series what they did in the 80s on, which was with PC magazine comics, and then I don't know if the clips took them over or not, but it might have just been Pacific Comics, which was called Strange Days. And I'm so glad to repeat them because Brendan McCarthy, you can definitely tell that he had a huge influence on artists like Jamie Hewlett, the creator of Tank Girl and the Gorillas. But this is one of the main stories, one of the best stories from the Strange Days. All the stories from Strange Days are featured in here, but one of the best ones was this character called Paradox. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with 2000 AD, but there was a comic in 2000 AD created by Grant Morrison called Zenith, about a rock star superhero. And Brendan McCarthy actually designed the costumes for that. And you can just see shades of what would be Zenith later on in Paradox. But fantastic artwork. There really is no artist like him. He's amazing. I mean, this book really emphasises the sheer vibrancy of his art style. But like I said, on this one, it looks. You can really tell when you look at early Tank Girl. You can really tell how much of an influence Brendan McCarthy had on Jamie Hewlett. But yeah, Paradox. I'm trying to remember. I've not actually read this again, but I did actually. Must be 84, 85. Sounds very, very small. I was about, if it was 84, I'd be about 14. And there used to be a shop in Manchester, just a corner shop. It was just like a normal kind of newsagents, but they had this little section where you could get like heavy metal, epic illustrated, and all these like adult orientated comics, and some like underground ones like the Fabulous Fairy Freak Brothers, who I've talked about in a previous video. And they sold Strange Days, and but they only had like issue 2, and I used my pocket money for it, and it was the best spending my money. And it was one of those comics when I got it, I was like, why haven't I got issue 1? And I think it took me like 10 years to find issue 1, but then life got in the way and I sold them. But I'm so glad I got the stories back again, because I mean, just amazing. Yeah, very vibrant, very trippy. You could. This was like. They were just at the heights of their creativity when they were doing this. You could tell it was almost like a jazz record where they're just throwing things to the wall and seeing what works story-wise. It's fantastic. He's wearing a superhero costume, and he's fighting supervillains, but they're not superheroes or supervillains like you'd see in Marvel or DC. They're just completely out there. I mean, this guy is amazing. These soldiers pop out of his body. That's his power. What's he called? I can't remember what it's called now, but just fantastic artwork. I mean, that cover. Absolutely brilliant. But yeah, I would recommend hunting this out. It's just a brilliant treasury of strips, what you'll never see the like of from anybody else. And it's interesting because they go from, so they've got Paradox, which is like in the Strange Days series, which is like the really, really early stuff from the early 80s. But then it jumps to Rogan Gosh, which was one of the first comics that yeah, that's right. It was a 2000 AD. In the 80s and early 90s, they did a series of comics. So they had Crisis, which is like a sister comic to Judge Dredd magazine and 2000 AD, but it dealt with more like political stories and more adult stories. And then a little bit later on, they had one called Revolver, which is more had more like a European feeling. They had strips in about Jimi Hendrix. Later on, they had a strip from Grant Morrison about Hitler, I think. But there's also this strip called Rogan Gosh, which basically was a celebration of all things Bollywood, and it says here that they got their influence from when he was young. He used to live. Brendan McCarthy says he grew up close to Southall in West London, and it had a large Asian population. And they sold bizarre Indian comics there, and he just devoured them because they're just so different to what was on the stands for Western comics like DC and Marvel. And so that influenced this storyline. It's so trippy, and again, artwork is absolutely to die for. Could I get any more camp with that? It's to die for. But yeah, gorgeous. It's a lot to take in on your first read. The artwork itself is like you're like, whoa! It's a huge sensory overload of visual information to take in, and the story as well. It takes a few reads for it to sink in. Like I said, I only got this last week, so I've not had a chance to reread it yet because I've got a huge mountain of books to go through at the moment. But the artwork is just jaw-dropping. I mean, this was before the use of computer colouring. All this was done on in marker pens. You'd never get colouring like this from anybody else. Brendan McCarthy is so distinctive in his style, and again, the writing of Pete Milligan. Pete Milligan's writing just blends and meshes so well with McCarthy's art styles. They just work perfectly in tandem. But yeah, it's a great story. Trippy as anything, really is. I mean, I've never read anything like it, and it's so experimental. So it get like the classic, almost like painterly style, and it goes full on whoa, kind of mind expanding. You'd be interested to know what they took while they were doing this. I mean, they might not have. I mean, I've seen interviews with Brendan McCarthy, and he's so straight laced looking and normal, and yet his head has all these weird ideas. It's just great. His style is just changes from page to page. So like you get normal comic pages, and you get like these kind of like illustration pages with text, and then you get. I mean, it's just it's great. But it's just one. It's trippy, but trippy in a good way. It does make sense, but you do need to, like I said, it makes sense, but you need to read it more than once, and it's worth it. Show you a few more pages. So yeah, so that's Rogan Gosh. I'll skip a few. And what I like, they also include stuff what they did when they were just basically out of art college, and it is a series called The Electric Hoax. Pardon me, just need to get a drink. Did a series called The Electric Hoax, which I actually remember this because I've stated I'm really old, but I also had an older brother, and he used to buy a music paper back in the 70s called Sounds. I mean, it went over my head because it was only little. I was only not even. It wasn't even 10. I was about 7 or 8. But they always had a strip at the back, a comic strip, and it was cool as I'd never seen anything like it. But anything with a comic in, I devoured. I've always been a comic reader. So in the 70s, I used to buy stuff like Planet of the Apes comic, and the old UK Marvel reprints of American Marvel in black and white. And he used to go to this shop where you could swap comics and get another one for 2p. So I've always had comics. I've always had comics in my life. But I remember this strip in the back of the Sounds music paper. And again, it's punk music in comic form. But yeah, I mean, McCarthy's style back then, I mean, he was only in his late teens then. His style back then was very different to what you saw in the earlier pages I showed you. But you can still see it's him. I mean, he did do quite a lot of art in the early days of 2000 AD. He did some. I remember he did a Judge Dredd strip. What really stuck with me, it was one of my favourites because when I was younger, and I used to buy 2000 AD, I'd read everything else apart from Judge Dredd. For some reason, I hated Judge Dredd when I was young, when I was little. But I did read it once because he had this like Dr. Frankenstein kind of character who made this creature. It scared the hell out of me, but I kept on going back to it and reading it. I mean, I absolutely love Judge Dredd now. It's one of those things that I think I grew to appreciate. I was too young to really understand what it was when I was younger. Now I realise that it's a satire of a country being run by a police state. But yeah, it's just his early artwork was again so impressive. And again, I've always, even though I didn't know who I didn't follow him religiously then because I was only a kid. But there was that germ of whenever I saw his artwork, I'd read the comic because I knew I kind of knew that style, and it it did. I've always liked weird arts. I've always liked that kind of artwork. Um, but yeah, it says he also designed this concept for a story called Freakwave. Um, and he was doing some ideas. He got inspired by the second Mad Max movie, and he was doing some ideas for his own ideas for film. What he was going to call Freakwave, because he was really into like doing this thing idea of like an apocalyptic story, but about surfers. But it never made it into a film, but it did get serialized in another PC comic called Vanguard Illustrated, and they've got it listed here. And again, beautiful use of colours, and so distinctively him. He's got a very European sensibility. I would put him up there with Mobius for that kind of style where nothing's wasted on a page, and you can read the comic more than once because you see things what you missed the first time round. And yet there's something very, very English about his artwork. He just knew how to do science fiction but give it like a punk edge. I mean, that is just amazing. So good. But yeah, this is that comic I was on about, Strange Days. So I was looking for the #1 for years and years and years, and finally found it. So I'm so pleased it came. They started reprinting it in here. But Strange Days was like him, Pete Milligan, and I think Brett Ewins, who did Johnny Nemo, and he ended up doing quite a bit of stuff for 2000 AD and DC. He did some strips, but this is featuring their stuff, and again, the artwork and the storylines were just like nothing else that was out there at the time in the market. So very, very good. Like, look at that. And there's I mean, what's more cooler than weird man baby Elvis? So good. But yeah, he's always been experimental. This is stuff from the early 80s, but he's always experimenting and pushing himself. And this drawing, yeah, 86, that drawing, 1986. This was an idea for a comic strip but never took off. So yeah, this book's really good because it's got full strips, but it's also got like ideas, what they penned for potential projects, what got didn't didn't get accepted. Paradox again. I think it's okay. It doesn't show anything really. Covers up the necessary parts. But yeah, I mean, if you look at that, initially it doesn't register that you're actually looking at a body with a body on top for a head. So always trippy, always out there. And what I liked about their stories, Pete Milligan's always played about, but in a cool way, with gender, sexuality, sexual politics, in a way where it's never been preachy, but it's been fun, which is how I think they should do it. I mean, speaking as a trans woman, I'm not one of those who bashes on saying, oh, you've got trans rights and stuff. I mean, it's valid, but do it in a way where you can make it accessible and fun for everybody. And Pete Milligan does it. I mean, this was years and years. This was done in the 80s, way before things like that were talked about. But they always have the finger on, like, it's always like they're being years before everybody else in comics. And then there was a series. They did a colour series for a Sunday paper, I think it was The Observer, called Summer of Love. which again, you could tell it's Milligan, but you could tell it's McCarthy and Milligan, but McCarthy, he can change his style, but you can still tell it's him. But then he even uses stuff like collage. This is from a story he did in the A1 book from a few years back, from about 20 years ago, not longer now. Which had like loads of short stories by big names: Eddie Campbell, Alan Moore, you name it, Stephen Bissett. There was a strip in 2000 AD called Sooner or Later, and they've reprinted it in here as well. Again, with this one, you can really tell the influence he had on a lot of today's artists who've made it big, like Jamie Hewlett, Philip Bond. Without him, they wouldn't be around. You know, you can just tell he had such an impact. And his colour, I just love the vibrancy of his colours. And then, in the 90s, they did a strip, what was in, I mentioned it before, a magazine called Crisis, which was like a sister publication to 2000 AD and Judge Dredd, but it dealt with more adult themes, and did a story called Skin. And it was the most controversial comic of that decade. It was basically about this, it was set in the 70s, and it's about a skinhead, but it was also one of the thalidomide babies. So it was one of those where the mums were given drugs when they were pregnant. When the baby was born, the limbs could be deformed, it could have parts missing off the body, or some serious health issues. So it addressed it by this character who was a skinhead, but he was also a thalidomide child. But they made him they did it in a way, I applaud them for it, because they didn't make him a figure of sympathy or somebody to pity. You know, he had attitude, and I think it's just a really, really good positive portrayal. I mean, you might not approve of the skinhead lifestyle. I mean, I'm a pure total wimp, but they didn't paint him like as a victim, even though it was thalidomide. He was, you know, he had as much moxie and guts as anybody else. You know, he wasn't a victim. He gave as good as he got. But yeah, but the comic scene and the press couldn't cope with this, and it kind of got a lot of negative press. I think it got released in American Prestige format as well. I mean, a lot. But the thing is, when anything, film or a comic or a book becomes controversial, it normally works in creators' favours as well, because I think they tried to ban it, but it didn't get banned. And like I said, when it did get released in prestige format, I think it was quite popular. I remember buying it like that as well. I mean, the artwork, I won't show the page because it gives it away, but the artwork is just absolutely jaw-droppingly good. And there's loads of it shows some of the shade the Changing Man covers what he did. So, like I said, I got it for £12. You can buy it. What I'd recommend is look on eBay. There are people selling it on Amazon, but they're asking for silly prices. So do look on eBay. But it's a great, great book. Get 2 thumbs up from me, and yeah, best of Milligan and McCarthy. You will never read another book quite like this, but you'll be pleased that you got it. If you like out there artwork, challenging stories, original stories, ideas that come from the left field, what you don't normally see in a comic, you'll love it. I really, really recommend it. Hopefully do another video next week. Don't know what it'll be yet, but I'll think about it. I've got a few ideas. Anyway, bye. Bye-bye.